welcome to another GDR Objectified field trip. As we approach the 30th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall, there are occasionally questions raised as to what exactly remains of the GDR in the unified Germany. Cynics often point to maybe the Ampelmännchen and the right on red-green arrow as the two surviving legacies of the workers and peasant state, but I think we all know that the legacy is much more broad than just that. Today's field trip will provide a good reminder. We're heading to Frankfurt Oder, a city of 60,000, 1 hour east of Berlin. In the GDR period, this was an important regional center and also economically, as it was home to the country's only semiconductor plant. Also a large concentration of National People's Army troops, given the proximity to both the border and the capital of Berlin. So we're going to head out there today and see what traces we can find of the GDR in the cityscape of Frankfurt Oder. Thanks for joining us, and let's head out.
Genevieve, what have I done?
One of Frankfurt's two main landmarks is this building, the Oder Tower. The name references the river that runs through the city and forms the border with Poland. This is a GDR high-rise that was built in the 70s and used as a youth hotel, in other words, a glorified youth hostel, primarily for large gatherings of socialist youth groups from the GDR and neighboring countries. Fans of post-Wende German film may recognize it as one of the settings from Andreas Dresen's excellent 1990s era film Grill Point. Sadly, the Grill Point, the snack bar which gave the film its name in English, has, like so much else here in the city, been torn down.
As World War II ground its way to a conclusion, Frankfurt had been largely spared, but the Soviet advance came directly to the city, and Frankfurt was declared a fortress by the Nazis, which meant it was to be defended at all costs. As a result, the city suffered heavily. Artillery bombardment and then the fighting in the city itself left 93% of central Frankfurt destroyed. This meant that the city planners in the GDR era had a free hand, and we're going to go see the core of the town here, specifically Karl Marx Street, which still bears the name of the inspiration of the communist movement. One of the criticisms here in Frankfurt is that the post-war planning didn't do enough to create the conditions for urban structures. As we'll see, they prioritized housing, and while that was certainly understandable given the circumstances, it has been difficult for Frankfurt to create a real town center as a result. This is the main strip, Karl Marx Street. So it's quite typical of GDR city building of the era of the 50s, early 60s, with the low-rise apartments with shops in front and a wide street for demonstrations, marches, etc. Central Frankfurt is home to a lot of GDR-era art. A fine example is this wall installation by Thomas Grzimek from 1982. It tells the story of the city's history in a few scenes and is made on terracotta with ceramic accents. Other art on Karl Marx Street includes Siblings by Liz Mills-Kratcheville and this fountain, Life by Christian Schulze, both created in the years 1987. So this is a great piece. Over my shoulder here you see a piece of art by Fritz Eisel from 1960. It's called Folk Dance, and it's a wonderful example of how careful renovation can keep art from the GDR era in the city space. A lot of these works have fallen victim to renovation work, in particular the installation of insulation, obviously necessary, but oftentimes little care or none was taken to see that artworks that adorned these buildings were saved. Here's an example where that happened. Let's go. This is the Große Schanstraße. In the late 1980s, this street was given a facelift in response to the perceived lack of urbanity in central Frankfurt. The area was given a number of very unique shops, including a pizzeria and a wine bar and a very nice cafe, and public art was integrated everywhere. There was a real attempt to connect this to everyday life. For example, this drinking fountain by Ernst Röhl. Gertrude Pohl contributed 3 partition walls in the courtyards of the adjacent residential blocks. Michael Voll contributed this bronze installation, technical and structural shapes. And Gerhard Bonsin created this ceramic seating area at one end of the street. Another work worth keeping an eye out for is The Social Events of the Present Day by Herdegen Fehlhaber, which takes the form of a large bronze medallion inlaid into the sidewalk itself. It has as its unifying theme peace. At its center, you will see doves of peace, but also other scenes etched into it that relate to this topic, including those of local and international relevance. Anchoring the update of the Große Schanstrasse was this house at right, an example of creative use of prefabricated building techniques. Artist Dora Kleemann created a series of aluminum panels for the facade. These tell the story of the history of Frankfurt Oder from its earliest days to the present. There's a considerable emphasis on the economic side of things, industry obviously, but also the agricultural and fishing industries that were quite present in the city historically. Often these are shown alone, but sometimes combined on a single panel. For me, the highlight of Große Schanstrasse is this painting, which has to be one of the most bizarre pieces of art that I have seen from the GDR era. This was officially approved, installed in a very prominent place, entitled Boulevard Passers-by. It is by Harald Schulze, and it clearly flies in the face of our expectations of what socialist art should be. This painting could surely be read in many ways, but it is inarguable that the socialist community depicted here would likely not have found favor with many SED authorities. But it did. The question is, why and how? I have no answers, but the painting is remarkable. I'm at the Europa University here in Frankfurt Oder, and behind me is one of the most remarkable pieces of GDR art I have ever seen. It is, as you can see, a glass wall painting done by Eberhard Heckstedt in 1978. It was originally found in the SED Party's training school here in Frankfurt Oder. The theme of this piece was the friendship of the peoples of the world. Let's go have a closer look. So, Heckstedt first sketched his work onto the glass, and if we go closer here, you can get a look at the pencil lines. And once he had his design on the glass, he then painted directly onto it from behind. So he was painting the image backwards, essentially. At any rate, regardless of how he did it, it has quite a remarkable impact. So this is one of the main GDR sites here in Frankfurt Oder, right in the middle of town. Behind me is the Cinema of Youth, opened on May Day in 1955. This is a building in the national construction tradition that was common at the time for representative buildings. The key example of this would be the Karl Marx Allee in Berlin. This cinema remained open through the GDR period to 1998, but as you can see behind me, it has fallen into disrepair. It's been empty for over 20 years. There are plans now to renovate the building and turn it into a gallery for East German art for the state of Brandenburg. So this is a bit of a ray of hope on the horizon here. The building features 2 wall paintings by a local artist, Grunemann, whose work we will see elsewhere later on. The themes here are, on the left of the building, agriculture, and on the right, industry. And in front of that, we can see over my shoulder here a sandstone sculpture of an agricultural worker, and on the other side, I will show you in a minute, a steel worker. Basically right next door to the cinema is another work by the artist Grunemann, whom I just mentioned. His name was Rudolf.
Born in 1905, worked until 1991. He created this clay-based mural for the administration building of the energy provider here in Frankfurt.
Then, while searching for yet another work by Rudolf Grunemann, sadly since dismantled, something emerged out of the misty Frankfurt morning that really caught my eye. It was a colored glass mosaic attached to the wall of what had been a neighborhood center housing a supermarket, restaurant, and other services. Although slightly marred by an advertising banner for the grand opening of a new Döner restaurant, the work has held up amazingly well with the passage of time. Entitled Fox in the Vineyard, it took its inspiration from the name of the neighborhood in which it was found, the Vintner's Ring, itself an allusion to the tradition of winemaking in Brandenburg. The artist was Werner Voigt, and it was installed in 1969. So I'm up at the Yuri Gagarin Ring. This is a housing development built in the 70s, named in honor of the first Soviet man in space, Yuri Gagarin. It has two sections, an outer ring, which is largely unrenovated, and inner ring of flats, which are the green space we just passed, and the one coming up here to the left used to both have buildings in them as well, but in the last 10-15 years, those have been removed to create green space and in response to the population decline. A piece of public art was commissioned for the site by two artists from the region, Axel and Carola Schulz. They're from Schwedt, which is just north of here, and they created this bronze installation between the late 70s and mid 80s, and it has the title Trip to the Soviet Union, and it features scenes from, of course, the Soviet Union. So during the Honecker era, there was a social building program, the goal of which was to build 1 million apartments by 1990 and solve the housing shortage that had plagued the GDR since its founding. Every GDR town, village, and city had a social building program. In the larger centers, like here in Frankfurt Oder, huge new districts were created. So in Berlin, we have Hohenschönhausen and Marzahn. Leipzig has Grünau. Here in Frankfurt, the district of Neuberry-Sindchen was created. Now, this was built on the southern edge of the city in the industrial prefab building style. And in the years since unification, as the city has shrunk, so has Neuberry-Sindchen along with it, but rather dramatically. I remember traveling through Frankfurt in the 90s on my way further south, and I remember this huge wall of prefab blocks sitting up on the elevation as the train would pass by. And it was quite a sight. Coming here today, it's amazing how much has been removed. So hundreds of millions of euros were spent removing unused blocks as population shifts occurred, demographic change occurred, and Neuberry-Sindchen is a perfect example of the effects of that. So things are quite open and green with grass and courtyards, etc., but also remarkably empty.
Oh Genevieve, what have I done? On second thought, you were the one, but I was too blind to see it. Minutes to hours, days into years, too late for flowers, but not for tears. What would you say, girl, if I begged you? I found a piece of amber we discovered on the beach, a butterfly suspended inside, gorgeous out of reach. Tell me, do you ever think think of me as that train left the station.